It was a quiet morning in a small suburban neighborhood. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft golden glow over the neatly trimmed lawns and freshly painted houses. Birds chirped in the distance, and the faint sound of a lawnmower hummed somewhere down the street. It was the kind of peaceful morning that made people feel safe and content in their little corner of the world. But not everyone was feeling that peace. A man in his late 30s, tall and well-built, was busy cleaning the front yard of a house. He wore a simple t-shirt and jeans, his hands gloved as he picked up leaves and debris, placing them into a large trash bag. He worked diligently, his movements steady and focused. This wasn't his home, but he had been hired by the homeowners to clean up their yard. They were away on vacation and had asked him to take care of the property while they were gone. He was good at his job, and he took pride in it. A few houses down, a woman stood by her window, sipping her morning coffee. She was in her early 50s, with sharp features and a permanent frown etched on her face. She had lived in the neighborhood for years and considered herself the unofficial watchdog of the community. She prided herself on knowing everyone's business and keeping an eye out for anything, or anyone, that seemed out of place. That morning, her eyes landed on the man cleaning the yard. She didn't recognize him. He wasn't one of the regular landscapers she had seen around. Her brows furrowed as she watched him work. Why was he there? Who was he? Her mind began to race with questions, and not the kind that led to friendly curiosity. No, her thoughts took a darker turn. She set her coffee cup down and grabbed her phone. Without hesitation, she dialed 911. "Hello, I'd like to report a suspicious person," she said, her voice tense. "There's a man outside my neighbor's house, and I don't think he's supposed to be there. He's black, and he's messing around in the yard. I don't know what he's doing, but it doesn't look right." The dispatcher on the other end listened carefully, asking a few questions to clarify the situation. The woman answered quickly, her tone growing more urgent with each word. She didn't have all the details, but she was convinced something was wrong. Why else would a stranger be cleaning someone else's yard? Within minutes, a police car pulled up to the street. The woman watched from her window, a sense of satisfaction creeping over her. She had done her duty. She had protected her neighborhood. The officers approached the man cautiously, their hands resting on their belts. The man paused his work, looking up in surprise as they approached. He set the trash bag down and raised his hand slightly, a gesture of goodwill. "Good morning, officers," he said politely. "Is everything okay?" One of the officers nodded, though his expression remained serious. "We received a call about a suspicious person in the area. Can you tell us what you're doing here?" The man nodded, understanding dawning on his face. "Of course. I was hired by the homeowners to clean up their yard. They're out of town, and they asked me to take care of the property while they're away. I have their contact information if you'd like to verify." The officers exchanged a glance, then nodded. The man pulled out his phone, scrolling through his messages until he found the conversation with the homeowners. He handed the phone to one of the officers, who quickly scanned the messages. After a moment, the officer handed the phone back. "Everything checks out. Sorry for the inconvenience." The man smiled, though there was a hint of sadness in his eyes. "No problem. I understand." As the officers walked back to their car, the man returned to his work, though the weight of the encounter lingered in the air. He had been through this before, being treated as suspicious simply because of the color of his skin. It wasn't new, but it never got easier. Meanwhile, the woman watched from her window, her satisfaction fading as she realized what had just happened. The man wasn't a threat. He wasn't doing anything wrong. He was just doing his job. A wave of guilt washed over her, but she quickly pushed it aside. She had only been looking out for her neighborhood, she told herself. She hadn't meant any harm. But deep down, she knew better. As the morning sun continued to rise, the neighborhood returned to its quiet rhythm. But for the man cleaning the yard and the woman watching from her window, the day had taken an unexpected turn, one that would leave a lasting impact on both of them. The police car drove away, leaving the man alone in the yard once more. He stood still for a moment, staring at the ground as the weight of what had just happened settled over him. His chest felt heavy, and he took a deep breath, trying to shake off the frustration and sadness that always came with moments like this. He had done nothing wrong. He was just working, trying to make an honest living. Yet, here he was, once again, being treated like a criminal. He wiped his hands on his jeans and picked up the trash bag, forcing himself to focus on the task at hand. The homeowners had trusted him to do a good job, and he wasn't going to let this incident stop him. He continued cleaning, his movements slower now, his mind still replaying the encounter with the police. A few houses down, the woman was still standing by her window, her coffee cup forgotten on the table. Her heart was racing, though she couldn't quite explain why. She had been so sure when she made the call, so convinced that she was doing the right thing. But now, doubt crept in. She replayed the scene in her mind, the man's calm demeanor, the way he had cooperated with the police, the way he had even smiled despite the situation. He hadn't been angry or defensive. He had been kind. Her stomach churned as the realization hit her. She had judged him. She had assumed the worst about him without knowing anything about him. And she had been wrong. She stepped away from the window, pacing her living room as guilt gnawed at her. What had she done? She had called the police on an innocent man, someone who was just trying to do his job. She had wasted their time and, worse, she had made him feel unwelcome in a neighborhood that wasn't even hers to police. Her mind raced as she tried to figure out what to do next. Should she apologize? Should she pretend it never happened? The thought of facing him made her nervous. What if he was angry? What if he yelled at her or told her off? She wasn't sure she could handle that. But as the minutes passed, the guilt grew heavier. She couldn't just ignore what she had done. She had to make it right, even if it was uncomfortable. She took a deep breath, grabbed her jacket, and stepped outside. The morning air was crisp, and the sound of birds chirping filled the silence. She walked slowly toward the house where the man was working, her heart pounding with every step. As she approached, she saw him kneeling by a flower bed, carefully pulling out weeds. He hadn't noticed her yet. She cleared her throat softly, and he looked up, his expression neutral but guarded. He stood slowly, brushing dirt off his hands. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone polite but distant. The woman hesitated, her words catching in her throat. She hadn't thought this far ahead. What was she supposed to say? How could she possibly explain herself? I wanted to apologize, she finally managed, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm the one who called the police. I thought you were doing something wrong. But I was mistaken, and I'm sorry." The man studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded slowly. "Thank you for saying that," he said quietly. "I appreciate it." His calm response surprised her. She had expected anger, or at least frustration. But he seemed understanding. It made her feel even worse. "I shouldn't have assumed," she continued, her words tumbling out now. "I don't know what came over me. I thought I was protecting the neighborhood, but I was wrong. I'm really sorry." The man sighed, looking down at the ground for a moment before meeting her eyes again. "It's okay," he said. "I get it. People make mistakes. But it's not easy, you know? Being treated like that just because of how I look. It happens more than you'd think." His words hit her like a punch to the gut. She had never thought about it from his perspective. She had never considered how often he might face situations like this, how exhausting it must be to constantly prove that he belonged, that he wasn't a threat. "I can't imagine," she said softly, her voice filled with regret. "I'm so sorry." He nodded again, accepting her apology but not offering any further reassurance. The silence between them was heavy, filled with unspoken thoughts and emotions. After a moment, the woman took a step back. "I'll let you get back to work," she said. "Thank you for being so understanding." The man gave her a small, tired smile. "Take care," he said simply. She turned and walked back to her house, her mind swirling with thoughts. She had apologized, but it didn't feel like enough. She had hurt someone, and no amount of words could undo that. As she stepped inside, she made a silent promise to herself: she would do better. She would think before she acted. She would try to see people for who they were, not what they looked like. Meanwhile, the man returned to his work, his heart still heavy but a little lighter than before. The apology had meant something, even if it didn't erase the pain. He hoped, maybe, that this incident would be a turning point, for her, for the neighborhood, and for anyone who had ever judged someone too quickly. The rest of the day passed quietly. The man finished his work, packed up his tools, and left the neighborhood without another word. As he drove away, he couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over him. It wasn't just this one incident, it was the accumulation of moments like this throughout his life. Moments where he had been made to feel like he didn't belong, like he was somehow less than. He wondered if it would ever change. Back in her home, the woman sat at her kitchen table, staring out the window. Her coffee had gone cold, but she didn't care. Her mind was too busy replaying the morning's events. She couldn't stop thinking about the man's calm demeanor, his quiet acceptance of her apology. He hadn't yelled or made her feel worse than she already did. Instead, he had simply acknowledged her words and moved on. His grace in the face of her mistake only made her feel more ashamed. She thought about her life, about the way she had always prided herself on being a good neighbor, a responsible citizen. She had always believed she was doing the right thing by being vigilant, by keeping an eye out for anything unusual. But now, she realized how flawed that mindset was. Her vigilance had turned into suspicion, and her suspicion had turned into prejudice. She had judged a man based on nothing more than the color of his skin, and that realization was hard to swallow. She picked up her phone and hesitated for a moment before opening her browser. She typed in a few words: racial bias, implicit prejudice, calling police on black people. The search results were overwhelming. Article after article popped up, detailing stories just like the one she had been a part of. Stories of black men and women being harassed, questioned, or even arrested for simply existing in public spaces. Stories of people like her, well-meaning but misguided, who had caused harm because of their unconscious biases. She clicked on one article and began to read. It was about a black man who had been arrested while sitting in a coffee shop, waiting for a friend. The police had been called because someone thought he looked suspicious. The man had been humiliated, handcuffed in front of everyone, only to be released later when it became clear he had done nothing wrong. The article went on to explain how these incidents were not isolated, they were part of a larger pattern of racial profiling and systemic racism. The woman felt a lump form in her throat as she read. She had always considered herself a good person, someone who treated everyone equally. But now, she realized that equality wasn't enough. She needed to actively challenge her own biases, to unlearn the stereotypes she had absorbed over the years. It wasn't enough to say, "I'm not racist." She had to do better. She closed her phone and sat in silence for a long time, her thoughts swirling. She thought about the man she had wronged, about the pain she had caused him, even if unintentionally. She thought about the countless others who had experienced similar situations, who had been made to feel like they didn't belong. And she thought about herself, about the kind of person she wanted to be. By the time the sun began to set, she had made a decision. She couldn't undo what she had done, but she could learn from it. She could educate herself, have difficult conversations, and work to be a better ally. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't happen overnight, but she was determined to try. As she stood up from the table, she felt a small sense of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this incident could be a turning point, not just for her, but for others as well. If she could change, maybe others could too. And maybe, together, they could create a world where no one had to feel the way that man had felt that morning. The next morning, the woman woke up with a sense of purpose. She had spent the previous evening reading, reflecting, and thinking about how she could make amends for her actions. She knew that a simple apology wasn't enough. She needed to take tangible steps to address her biases and contribute to positive change. But where to start? She decided to begin by having an honest conversation with someone she trusted. She called her younger sister, who had always been more socially aware and outspoken about issues of race and inequality. When her sister answered, the woman took a deep breath and began to explain what had happened. "I messed up," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I called the police on a man who was just doing his job. I didn't even think about why I was doing it, I just assumed he didn't belong there. And now I feel terrible." Her sister listened quietly, not interrupting. When the woman finished, there was a brief silence before her sister responded. "I'm glad you're realizing this," she said gently. "It's not easy to confront your own biases, but it's important. What are you going to do about it?" The woman hesitated. "I don't know. I apologized to him, but it doesn't feel like enough. I want to do more, but I'm not sure where to start." Her sister thought for a moment. "Start by educating yourself. Read books, watch documentaries, listen to people's stories. And don't be afraid to have uncomfortable conversations. It's the only way to grow." The woman nodded, even though her sister couldn't see her. "You're right. I need to do better. I don't want to mess up again." "You will," her sister said bluntly. "Everyone does. But the important thing is to keep trying. Don't let fear of making mistakes stop you from doing the work." The conversation left the woman feeling both inspired and overwhelmed. She knew her sister was right, but the path ahead felt daunting. Still, she was determined to take the first step. Later that day, she drove to a local bookstore and asked for recommendations on books about racial justice and anti-racism. The employee handed her a stack of titles, and she left with a bag full of books she had never considered reading before. When she got home, she sat down with the first one and began to read. The more she read, the more she realized how much she didn't know. The books opened her eyes to the history of systemic racism, the ways it still affected people today, and the role she had played in perpetuating it, even unintentionally. It was uncomfortable, even painful at times, but she kept reading. She knew this was just the beginning. Meanwhile, the man who had been at the center of the incident was also reflecting on what had happened. He had accepted the woman's apology, but the encounter had left him feeling drained. He knew her actions weren't personal, they were part of a larger problem he had faced his entire life. Still, it was exhausting to constantly navigate a world that saw him as a threat. As he went about his day, he thought about how he could use his experience to spark change. Maybe he could share his story, or get involved in community outreach. He wasn't sure yet, but he knew he wanted to do something. Both the woman and the man were on their own journeys, but their paths were beginning to converge in unexpected ways. They were both taking steps, however small, toward understanding and growth. And in doing so, they were setting the stage for something bigger, something that could change not just their lives, but the lives of others as well. Over the next few days, the woman immersed herself in learning. She read books, listened to podcasts, and even joined an online discussion group about racial justice. The more she learned, the more she realized how much work there was to do, not just in the world, but within herself. She began to see how her actions, even the small ones, could have a ripple effect. It was both humbling and empowering. One evening, as she scrolled through the discussion group, she came across a post about community outreach programs. The post mentioned a local organization that worked to bridge gaps between different racial and cultural groups in the area. It focused on education, dialogue, and creating spaces where people could come together to learn from one another. The woman felt a spark of hope. This was something she could be a part of. The next day, she reached out to the organization and signed up to volunteer. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she was determined to contribute in any way she could. When she arrived for her first meeting, she was nervous. The room was filled with people of different ages, races, and backgrounds, all united by a common goal, to create a more inclusive community. As the meeting began, the facilitator asked everyone to share why they were there. When it was the woman's turn, she took a deep breath and spoke honestly. "I'm here because I made a mistake," she said. "I judged someone based on their race, and I hurt them. I want to learn how to do better, and I want to help make sure no one else has to go through what that person did." Her words were met with nods and understanding smiles. No one judged her or made her feel ashamed. Instead, they welcomed her and thanked her for her honesty. It was a small moment, but it meant the world to her. Meanwhile, the man who had been cleaning the yard was also thinking about how he could make a difference. He had always been someone who believed in the power of community, and he knew that sharing his story could help others. He reached out to a local advocacy group and offered to speak at one of their events. They gladly accepted. On the day of the event, he stood in front of a small but attentive audience and shared his experience. He talked about what had happened that morning, how it had made him feel, and why it was important to address these issues head-on. "This isn't just about me," he said. "It's about all of us. It's about creating a world where no one has to feel like they don't belong." His words resonated with the audience, sparking a lively discussion. People shared their own experiences, asked questions, and brainstormed ways to create change in their community. By the end of the event, the man felt a sense of hope he hadn't felt in a long time. He realized that while he couldn't change the past, he could help shape the future. As the days passed, both the woman and the man continued on their respective paths, unaware that their journeys were about to intersect once again. The woman's volunteer work was leading her to new connections and opportunities, while the man's advocacy was gaining momentum. They were both taking small but meaningful steps toward creating a more inclusive world, and those steps were bringing them closer together. The woman's involvement with the community organization grew deeper with each passing week. She attended workshops, helped organize events, and even facilitated a few discussions herself. It wasn't always easy, she often felt out of her depth, but she was committed to learning and growing. She began to form genuine connections with people she might never have interacted with before, and those connections opened her eyes to perspectives she had never considered. One day, the organization announced a special event, a community dialogue on racial bias and its impact on everyday life. The event would feature guest speakers, including individuals who had experienced racial profiling firsthand. The woman immediately volunteered to help with the planning. As she reviewed the list of speakers, one name caught her attention. It was the man she had called the police on weeks earlier. Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't seen him since that morning in the yard, and the thought of facing him again filled her with a mix of anxiety and hope. She wondered if he would remember her, if he would be angry or disappointed. But she also saw this as an opportunity, a chance to show him that she had taken his words to heart, that she was trying to do better. On the day of the event, the room was packed. People from all walks of life had come to listen, learn, and share. The woman worked behind the scenes, helping with logistics and making sure everything ran smoothly. When it was time for the man to speak, she stood at the back of the room, her heart pounding. He walked to the front with confidence, his presence commanding the room's attention. He began by sharing his story, starting with the incident in the yard. He spoke calmly but powerfully, describing how it felt to be treated as a threat simply because of his skin color. He talked about the toll it took on him, not just that day, but every time something like that happened. As he spoke, the woman felt a lump form in her throat. Hearing his perspective, his pain, made her realize the full weight of what she had done. But she also felt a sense of pride in him for standing up and sharing his story, and pride in herself for being there to listen. When he finished speaking, the room erupted in applause. The man stepped down from the stage, and the woman hesitated for a moment before approaching him. "Hi," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I don't know if you remember me, but I'm the one who called the police on you that day." He looked at her, his expression thoughtful but not unkind. "I remember," he said. "You apologized." She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I did, but I wanted to say it again. I'm so sorry. And I want you to know that I'm trying to do better. I've been learning, and listening, and I'm just really sorry." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Thank you," he said. "That means a lot." The woman felt a wave of relief wash over her. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a start. They stood there for a moment, two people brought together by a painful experience but united by a shared desire for change. As the event continued, the woman felt a renewed sense of purpose. She knew there was still so much work to be done, but she was ready to do it. And for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful about the future. The community dialogue event marked a turning point for both the woman and the man. For her, it was a moment of closure and a reminder of why she had started this journey in the first place. For him, it was a validation of his decision to speak out and share his story. They didn't know it yet, but their paths were about to intertwine in a way that would change both of their lives. In the days following the event, the woman continued her work with the organization, throwing herself into every project with renewed energy. She helped plan workshops, organized community cleanups, and even started a book club focused on anti-racism literature. She was determined to make a difference, no matter how small. One afternoon, as she was leaving a meeting, she ran into the man again. He was standing outside the community center, talking to one of the organizers. When he saw her, he smiled and waved her over. "Hey," he said. "I was just talking about you." The woman blinked in surprise. "Me?" He nodded. "Yeah. I heard about all the work you've been doing with the organization. It's really impressive." She felt a flush of pride but quickly shook her head. "I'm just trying to do my part. After everything that happened, I just want to make things right." The man studied her for a moment, then smiled. "You are. Trust me, it means a lot to see people like you stepping up and taking responsibility. It's not easy, but it's important." The woman felt a lump form in her throat. His words meant more to her than he could possibly know. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That really means a lot coming from you." They stood there for a moment, the weight of their shared history hanging in the air. Then the man spoke again. "You know, I've been thinking about starting a new project, something that brings people together to have honest conversations about race and bias. I was wondering if you'd be interested in helping me with it." The woman's eyes widened in surprise. "Me? Really?" He nodded. "Yeah. You've been doing great work, and I think you'd be a big help. Plus, it would be a good way for us to turn what happened into something positive." The woman felt a surge of excitement. This was exactly the kind of opportunity she had been hoping for, a chance to make a real impact. "I'd love to," she said without hesitation. "Just tell me what you need me to do." Over the next few weeks, they worked together to bring the project to life. They called it Building Bridges, and its goal was to create safe spaces for people to have open, honest conversations about race and bias. They planned workshops, discussion groups, and community events, all designed to foster understanding and empathy. As they worked side by side, the woman and the man began to form a genuine friendship. They shared their stories, their struggles, and their hopes for the future. They laughed together, debated ideas, and supported each other through the challenges of their work. It wasn't always easy, there were moments of tension and discomfort, but they were committed to pushing through and learning from each other. One evening, after a long day of planning, they sat together in a quiet corner of the community center, sipping coffee and reflecting on how far they had come. "I never would have imagined this," the woman said, shaking her head. "If you had told me a few months ago that I'd be doing this kind of work, I wouldn't have believed you." The man smiled. "Life has a funny way of surprising us, doesn't it?" She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I just wish I had realized all of this sooner. I wish I hadn't caused so much harm." "We all make mistakes," he said gently. "What matters is what we do after. You're doing the work now, and that's what counts." His words brought her a sense of peace. She knew she couldn't change the past, but she could shape the future. And with him by her side, she felt like anything was possible. As they sat there, the woman felt a deep sense of gratitude, for the man's forgiveness, for the opportunity to make a difference, and for the chance to grow into a better version of herself. She knew there was still a long way to go, but for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful about the journey ahead. The Building Bridges project quickly gained momentum, thanks to the combined efforts of the woman and the man. Their partnership became the heart of the initiative, and their shared commitment to creating change inspired others to join in. The community responded with enthusiasm, and soon their workshops and events were drawing crowds of people eager to learn and engage. One of their most successful events was a storytelling night, where community members were invited to share personal experiences related to race, bias, and belonging. The woman and the man co-hosted the evening, setting the tone with their own stories. The woman spoke openly about her journey, how she had made a mistake, confronted her biases, and committed to doing better. Her vulnerability resonated with the audience, many of whom had their own stories of growth and regret. When it was the man's turn to speak, he shared not only his experience of being profiled but also his hope for the future. "Change starts with us," he said. "It starts with conversations like these, with listening to each other, and with being willing to admit when we're wrong. We're all here because we believe in something better, and that's powerful." The room erupted in applause, and the energy was electric. One by one, people stood up to share their stories, some heartbreaking, some hopeful, all deeply human. By the end of the night, the room felt lighter, as if a collective weight had been lifted. The woman and the man exchanged a look of quiet pride. They were making a difference, one conversation at a time. As the weeks turned into months, their project began to attract attention beyond their community. Local media picked up on their work, and they were invited to speak at schools, churches, and even a city council meeting. Their message was simple but powerful: change is possible, but it requires effort, humility, and a willingness to listen. Despite their growing success, the woman and the man remained grounded. They knew their work was far from over, and they were constantly looking for ways to improve and expand their impact. One evening, as they sat in the community center brainstorming ideas, the man turned to the woman with a thoughtful expression. "What if we took this to the next level?" he asked. "What if we created a program to train people to facilitate these conversations in their own communities? We could reach so many more people that way." The woman's eyes lit up. "That's a great idea. We could create a toolkit, host training sessions, and even offer ongoing support. It could be like a ripple effect, spreading out from here to other neighborhoods, other cities." They spent the rest of the evening sketching out a plan, their excitement growing with each new idea. By the time they left, they had a clear vision for what they wanted to do. They called it the Bridge Builders Initiative, and it became their most ambitious project yet. Launching the initiative wasn't easy. It required long hours, difficult conversations, and a lot of trial and error. But the woman and the man were determined, and their partnership only grew stronger as they worked together. They balanced each other out. She brought organization and attention to detail, while he brought vision and a deep understanding of the issues they were addressing. One of the most rewarding moments came when they held their first training session. A diverse group of people gathered in the community center, eager to learn how to facilitate conversations about race and bias. As the woman and the man stood at the front of the room, they felt a sense of pride and hope. These were the people who would carry their work forward, who would create change in their own communities. At the end of the session, one of the participants approached them. "Thank you," she said, her eyes shining with emotion. "I've always wanted to do something like this, but I didn't know where to start. You've given me the tools and the confidence to make a difference." The woman and the man exchanged a smile. Moments like these made all the hard work worth it. They knew they were just two people in a much larger movement, but they also knew that every small step mattered. Together, they were building bridges, not just between individuals, but between communities, cultures, and hearts. As they packed up after the session, the woman turned to the man. "I'm really proud of what we've done," she said. "And I'm grateful for you. I don't think I could have done this without you." He smiled. "We make a good team. And we're just getting started." The Bridge Builders initiative grew beyond anything the woman and the man could have imagined. What had started as a small project in their local community soon expanded to neighboring towns, then cities, and eventually even other states. Their toolkit for facilitating conversations about race and bias became a widely used resource, and their training sessions were consistently packed with people eager to learn and make a difference. As their work gained recognition, the woman and the man were invited to speak at national conferences and collaborate with organizations dedicated to racial justice. They became known not just for their initiative but for their powerful partnership, a living example of how understanding and collaboration could create meaningful change. Despite their growing fame, they remained grounded. They never lost sight of why they had started this journey in the first place. For the woman, it was about making amends and using her privilege to uplift others. For the man, it was about creating a world where no one had to feel the way he had that morning in the yard. Together, they were a force to be reckoned with, but they always made time for the small, personal moments that reminded them of their purpose. One such moment came during a community event they hosted in their hometown. It was a celebration of the progress they had made, but also a reminder of the work still to be done. As they stood on stage, looking out at the crowd of familiar faces, the woman felt a surge of emotion. "When I first started this journey," she began, her voice steady but filled with feeling, "I was ashamed of my actions. I had hurt someone, and I didn't know how to make it right. But through this work, I've learned that change isn't about perfection, it's about effort. It's about showing up, even when it's hard, and being willing to listen and grow." The man stepped forward, his presence calm and reassuring. "And I've learned that forgiveness is powerful," he said. "Not just for the person who's hurt you, but for yourself. Holding on to anger and pain only weighs you down. But when you let it go, you create space for something better, for understanding, for connection, for hope." The crowd erupted in applause, and the woman and the man shared a smile. They had come so far, not just in their work but in their friendship. What had started as a painful encounter had blossomed into a partnership that had touched countless lives. After the event, as they packed up and prepared to leave, the woman turned to the man. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" she asked. "If I hadn't called the police that day, if we hadn't crossed paths, none of this would have happened." He nodded thoughtfully. "I do. But I also think everything happens for a reason. That moment brought us here, and look at what we've been able to do together. I wouldn't change it." She smiled, her eyes glistening with tears. "Neither would I." As they walked out of the community center, the sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow over the neighborhood. The streets were quiet, but the air was filled with a sense of possibility. They had built something beautiful out of something painful, and they knew their work wasn't done. There were still bridges to build, conversations to have, and hearts to change. But for now, they allowed themselves a moment of quiet pride. They had turned a moment of regret into a movement of hope, and that was something worth celebrating. As they parted ways that evening, the woman felt a deep sense of gratitude, for the man's forgiveness, for the community's support, and for the chance to be part of something bigger than herself. She knew there would always be more to learn, more to do, but she was ready for the journey. And so was he. Together, they had created a legacy of change, one conversation, one connection, one bridge at a time.